Well, welcome to Voices of Women. I'm your host, Chris Stanis, and I'm also the founder of Women of Wisdom Foundation. We have been putting on conferences since 1993 in Seattle, and for the very first year, of course, this year is going to be virtual. You can check it all out at our website, womanofwisdom.org. We have special guests this year, Teri Tempest-Williams and Louisa Teach. We're very excited about that. And now I'm interviewing some of our WOW presenters, and today I have Teri Ciacchi, and Shelley Koorbatoff. I hope I said that right.
Teri Ciacchi and Shelley Koorbatoff.
Koorbatoff. Teri and Shelley will be giving a workshop on Saturday afternoon on March 13th. It's called Unwinding Envy. So Reverend Teri Ciacchi is a relational matrix of the living love revolution, a holistic sex educator, a priestess of Aphrodite, a leader of the EcoSexuality movement, and EcoMagicks practitioner. They have been generating Cascadia Holistic Peer Counseling system since 1997, holding Aphrodite Temples since 2000, and co-created annual EcoSex events, including Surrender, the EcoSex Convergence from 2013 to 2018. In 2017, she started Interdependence and Autonomy LLC, a for-profit business that builds consent culture by healing conflict through education and legal advocacy. Shelley Koorbatoff is a Canadian doucabor, which I'll ask her what that means, working and living in Canada and the USA. So right here, I'm going to ask you, Shelley, what is a doucabor?
Right. Well, thank you for asking me. I love to share about that. I'll just say very briefly that doucabor is like a Christian-based sect out of Russia. It's like a Hutterite or a Mennonite. And we believe that singing is the voice of the soul and that the spirit of God lives within each one of us. And so we're pacifist. And when we pray, the men and the women, they face each other as equals. So those are some of our core and fundamental beliefs and attitudes.
Wow, thank you for that. It's very interesting. Well, for over 25 years, Shelley has been a consultant leading multi-million-dollar change initiatives across North America. She's a leader of transformational programs, including the Self-Expression and Leadership Program of Landmark Worldwide and Lasting Health Crossing into New Territory. Shelley is a resource for holistic healing as an Aphrodite Temple priestess of the Living Love Revolution. She builds leadership and brings people together to collaborate on transformative projects. So welcome, Teri and Shelley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're so excited to have you at the conference. Teri, it's not your first time. You were here many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, like in 98, 99, like way back then.
Yeah, yes, which is exciting to have you back.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start with Teri since Shelley already shared a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I used to be like, I went to college at Stevens College and got a degree in human ecology. And then I got a master's in psychiatric social work. And I did those things for quite some time. And then I started in about 2009 to create my own system called Living Love Revolution after doing some landmark education training. So pretty much my whole life is like an integrated piece of art and activism. It's a feminist, eco-feminist praxis where all of my relationships with humans and non-humans are about trying to move us toward unitary consciousness using principles of feminism, nonviolence, and trying to evolve. You know, we create our own language a lot. Like we say things like the fading Uber culture is a kind of way to say, to declare a spell that we're trying to move out of patriarchy, which we consider the fading Uber culture, and into new worlds that allow us to center love and pleasure and peacefulness in all of our lives. And so there's a number of projects coming from that. Living Love Revolution is a church based on constitutional law and declaration. And we do Aphrodite Temples, and we do yearly gatherings, and we do classes like Unwinding Envy in an attempt to have people develop the critical skills that help them look at how do their own behaviors and their daily interaction, their daily relationships, how do those behaviors keep us stuck in things like competition and jealousy and envy instead of co-creating movements towards unitary consciousness and nonviolence and peace and liberation.
Yes, and that's what you're bringing to the conference, which is
Yeah,
a
we're
great
excited
topic for
about
Women of Wisdom. And Shelley, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, what I'll add to that is, I very much came from the corporate world. I've been, I spent a long time of my life working 60 to 80 hours a week in like the government offices with that buzz of fluorescent lighting. And I was very successful professionally, and I noticed that something was missing. And like there was a part of me that I really wasn't connected to. And in my first Aphrodite temple, Teri, what was that, about 4 years ago?
Yeah.
I think 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. I remember walking in, and this might seem like completely off topic, but I remember walking in being completely clear that I prefer dating men. Like there was no question about it. And I didn't have a problem with that. I was just clear about it. And during the Aphrodite Temple weekend, the first one that I did, I saw that this preference was actually a barrier between me and other people. And that I could experience genuine, like intimacy and love and intimate love with anybody. And, I still have a preference for men, but that barrier between people is gone. And it's really altered my life and how I relate to people in a way that is quite unexpected. So that's, I've been working with Teri and Living Love Revolution ever since. And I love these programs and workshops that we co-create together that, really expand what it is that we think is important. Yeah, it makes a difference for people.
So let's talk about Living Love Revolution. What specifically is that, and your roles in this? So it's actually a church, you said.
Yeah, it's a church. And what it is when people come to our events, and they're any donation or something that they give me is a donation to the church, Living Love Revolution. And they're purchasing a membership in the church when they come and do that. So then we have a list of all of the activities of Living Love Revolution, create a temporary autonomous zone, so that from the time, like, say, if you come to when you come to the Unwinding Envy class at Women of Wisdom, Shelley and I'll share a few things at the beginning that are the agreements. Like we agree to not interrupt each other. Like we agree to create space to breathe and bring our whole selves present, right? So that there's embodiment aspects, there's a somatics present. We agree to think well of each other. And if we have a disagreement or a conflict, we agree to talk it through or bring it up, rather than going off and gossiping about it and creating conflict elsewhere, right? So all of these basic agreements exist for the duration of the class or your participation in whatever event there is. And that makes it a co-created declared space. Is it too esoteric what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I mean that's also what we do at Women of Wisdom. We kind of we set our sacred circle. It's confidentiality. Anything said in the circle that stays there, and yeah, you honor agreements that you need to make whenever you have a group gathering. And women are great at doing that. I think we've been doing that for years.
Women are great at doing that. In fact, women, are great at generating life and great at generating life affirming agreements with each other. Yes.
So one of the things, and you mentioned this, but you intertwine a lot of things together, like science, mysticism, and feminism.
Yeah.
Tell us about the connection of all that and how you bring that all together.
Well, one thing that I'm super excited about, it's Kristen Uvenas Moberly, I think is her last name. There's a Swedish
from Germany
woman scientist who wrote about oxytocin. And this is one of the things where she wrote about oxytocin because after she gave birth and was breastfeeding, she noticed a significant change in her own mood and experience. So as a scientist, of course, she was super I need to figure this out, right? And so she led a whole bunch of research and science to find out that even though what mostly people were talking about was a fight or flight mechanism in human reaction to events, that we also have a calm and connect circuitry in our nervous system. And that calm and connect circuitry is generated by oxytocin and serotonin, those hormones coming out of our endocrine system as a response. And then she furthered her research. She's now got, I think, 5 books, at least 4 that I'm aware of. And the one I think I ordered yesterday when Shelley and I were preparing for this, it's on its way to my house now. But the importance of this is that when we look at a human being has the most oxytocin, which creates attachment and creates peacefulness, right? And generates pleasure, is a woman in the process of giving birth. That's the human being that has the most oxytocin. And another thing that happens is whatever level of oxytocin is in that birthing woman at the time transfers to her baby. So you, as a person, when the amount of oxytocin your mother had during the birth experience gave you an oxytocin set point, which means your own body's ability to determine when you have a feeling of satisfaction occurs based on how much oxytocin was present at your birth. Like that's okay. Now the importance of this is we kind of are unconsciously creating a warrior cult by having babies with low oxytocin rates and high levels of cortisol, androgen, testosterone, alarm systems, right? Adrenaline. And so what we're trying to do is, 1, create events that help people have secure attachment, and 2, create events that increase people's ability to feel pleasure. Why? Because that expands their calm and connect circuitry so that people can be in a place of peacefulness and desire to stay connected and have a sense of belonging. All of those experiences of peace, belonging, and pleasure are determined by the science of how much oxytocin and serotonin are present in your body, right? So we're going to try to create events and systems where people go, oh, if I'm in a situation where I feel like I'm competing and at risk or endangered with other women all the time, woman to woman experiences of jealousy and envy, it's very unlikely that I'll ever have the spaciousness to move towards nonviolence and peace and a sense of satisfaction, belonging, and connection. So this is how we take this science idea and this mystical desire for peace and the visionary ideas of how can we live in a future of peace that we envision very clearly, that's right now a fantasy, right? So that's how we're merging science and spirituality in some ways with feminism and sociology, by educating each other about these things and then creating classes and workshops and experiences where people can actually, we could say that, but then we need to actually do something that creates in your body while you're with us that sense of resonance and generates oxytocin and serotonin. And as Shelley said earlier, it's in line with Doukhobor beliefs that singing is a sacred process. Well, singing is sacred because it generates the literal energy of resonance. So that, for example, when we just go, oh, and other people join us in that, which is difficult on a Zoom call because there's a lag time that makes it dissonant. But when we just do that, that already moves us towards our vision. The simple act of making a resonant sound.
So I'm curious, that's interesting, the oxytocin of your baseline, I guess what you're saying is how much you had when you were born.
Yes.
And in my generation, which might also be close to yours too, is how many mothers, were sedated.
Yes.
And in the 50s, they didn't breastfeed and all that. So hopefully, so it's a matter of, okay, how can we increase our baseline if we didn't have much to begin with? And that's kind of the work that you're doing too.
It is, absolutely.
Yes, which is great. So another thing, and you just shared a whole lot of, but that's what you'll be doing in the workshop and experiencing that. But it's also bringing in the mythology, the ancient mythology. You got Medusa, witches, and and what role they play in the collective unconsciousness in women in our culture, that sometimes we don't even think, because it's unconscious, we don't even think about how this impacts us. Yet we're aware of outside what's happening now and things, but we sometimes don't bring it into ourselves and what's in our unconscious of this, these ancient things like that have been with us. It's almost like, I think it's in our DNA and it's in our cellular structure of what's gone on generations, thousands of years before us, that still impact us, and we're not always conscious of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true, Chris. And that's really what was the spark for Unwinding Envy. And I noticed, like, as a priestess body, those of us who participate in Living Love Revolution, there was one of the other women in our group, and she is more successful than me in some areas. And like, she's got her website up, and she's, moved forward with this counseling practice. And I found myself feeling like looking at her success, and rather than being celebratory about it, I felt like a failure. And I would even go so far as to have these like daydreams about her, like making a fool out of herself, like falling out of favor, and me being like secretly happy that that's happening. And I just, it's like, wow, what is going on? Like, what is this all about? Like, oh, and I had to like look and say, I am jealous. And just saying that, it was so hard for me to admit. And like, mostly, I think we think of jealousy and envy as like the mean girl in high school or something like that. But is it really actually present in our lives today? And I went to Teri, I said, Teri, we have to create a workshop on jealousy and envy. It is here, it's alive, and mostly we don't see it. And as soon as we created this, I started to notice it in more areas of my life. And, I remember very vividly walking down the hallway behind this other woman, and, we're about the same age, about the same size. And I remember checking out her butt and thinking, yeah, I'm pretty sure mine's nicer than hers. And like being validated by that, And so started to look at, so like, why is this there? Why do we do that? And you talk about like from the past, and about the mysticism, like the mythology part of it. And we started to really dig in and see, this is social programming, and we're blind to it. And when we talk about the past, we are not talking about 100 years ago. When I started to look at like the data and do some research, I found out that in the United States, that women were not allowed to have their own bank account until 1974 without a man signing for it. And that's like less than 50 years ago. And so there were parts of our lives not very long ago when we were literally dependent on men for survival. We couldn't own property, we couldn't vote, and the further back you go, you can see those things in our history. And of course, I was born in 1971, so the world that I was born into, or at least certainly as an adult, I didn't have to deal with those things. But the women who raised me, my mother, my grandmother, that was their reality. And that's the world they raised me into, like from those views and those perspectives. And Unwinding Envy is really an opportunity for us to acknowledge that envy does exist, that it exists in our day-to-day interactions, that it's having an impact on our relationships between women and beyond that as well. It's certainly not exclusive to women, but there is that stereotype for sure that we really want to bust up. And so this really is an opportunity to acknowledge it, to see more about where it comes from, and then to like release shame associated to it and create declarations of allyship. And, Teri does such a great job of really creating the mythology and where this comes from that we're talking about.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I know this, I think we all can recognize this in ourselves. And I think some of it's about comparing yourself. And I sometimes, having founded Women of Wisdom, and then I see other women's organizations or other women's conferences, and oh, look how far they've gone. I haven't gone that far. And then someone called me out of the blue. I got this phone call, and this woman said, no, you guys are authentic. You go to your website and it's kind of like you forget who you are by comparing yourself to somebody else. And yet honor what you have done, honor who you are. There's no reason to compare, because there's a gift in all of, we're going to attract certain people, they're going to attract certain people. And it's, step out of that envy box, that comparison box. It actually just holds you back and keeps you from moving forward and growing and being better at what you do.
Yeah. And even worse than that, I find that I really get engaged in it's that because it's a destructive force. Not only do I feel smaller for myself, I'm wishing, bad things on others, for lack of a better way to say it. But it's this world that exists that we're really wanting to bring awareness to and interrupt.
Yeah, interrupt. That's a good word for that. To stop, be aware of that thought that you're having and realize it's not true.
That's right.
And where does it come from? And it's almost like censor it, cancel. Let's go,
right. Yeah. And we chose the term unwinding because of the mythological history of women as fates weaving their destinies, right? So if we're unwinding something that was unconsciously given to us that we're just habitually perpetuating, and we can start the warp and the weft again in a different manner and co-evolve our chosen vision for the future, rather than just unconsciously perpetuating patriarchy when our values are not aligned with that. And why would we do that, right? So we have to help each other wake up,
right,
out of the trance of it.
Yeah, you brought it. I was going to bring it up too. Patriarchy. We live in this patriarchal culture, and it impacts us, and sometimes it's really subtle. Like we've been brought up in it, so we don't even see how all the ways it impacts us. And I know I have in workshops I've done, I've talked to many women where they still feel like they aren't valued, their voices aren't valued. So why bother? Don't speak up if you're in the corporate world, because you aren't heard, you aren't valued. And I think that's some of the reasons a lot of women leave. And Shelley, you talked about that, leaving that corporate structure perpetuates a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm still there in that corporate structure, and I have all these resources now to support me inside of it.
Yeah, and that's important to know too, because some women want to be there. They want to have that kind of job. They want to, be there, but how can they be there and be true to themselves, and learning these skills, and so that you're not walking down the hallway comparing your butt to somebody else's butt or whatever the comparison.
Right. And we also,
or if I am, I can be appreciating rather than judging.
I think it's also really important to be clever. The patriarchy and capitalism exist, and we must be able to survive in it and extract resources from it to repurpose them to the goals and the fantasies and the visions that we want to femifest and manifest. So it's good to to learn how to shapeshift and be like, okay, I'm going to go in the corporate thing and be like this, and I know the rules, and it's like this. And then in my free time, here's what I'm actually doing for me and for other people to move towards liberation.
Well, something that comes to mind with this too, that it follows with this, is shame. That shame we feel inside ourselves. I mean, I think there's an unconscious collective consciousness around shame with women. Absolutely. And plays into this too.
One of the things that we do in the workshop is an allyship circle, where we each speak to things that we have done that we feel ashamed of, and then we look around and other people acknowledge, yeah, I feel that too. Because when you stop making it be a personal thing, that's something that you as an individual do, and you look at how it's a collective response to oppression,
right?
And when you acknowledge that, then it makes it easier to let go of it and dissolve it, because you can forgive yourself and go, oh, that's a human being thing. That's not a Teri Ciacchi being a horrible person.
Right. I'm not the only one that's done that.
I'm not. And oh, look, we're all doing that. So, hey, why don't we all just agree to stop? And then you can, because you're rewarded for it by the sense of relief and redemption that comes from giving it up.
Yes, and I think you're talking about speaking it out loud, I
Yeah.
think is what releases shame. After 28 years of women of wisdom, even in the beginning, it's a place where women can share their stories. And some of that is speaking those shameful things. When you hear someone else speak about something that they're don't feel bad about or whatever, it gives you permission to speak it out, also speak it out loud. And with that comes a healing. It's releasing it instead of holding it in. Because when we don't talk about it, we just hold it in and we carry it in our body.
Yeah.
And it's really harmful.
It's true.
So what's that one simple thing you can do to begin unwinding envy right now? What little tip you can give people?
Do you remember,
Yeah,
Shelley?
I think you,
this?
I think you were pointing to it actually, Chris, is, really just to start noticing it in your life, being present to it, allowing yourself to see where it comes up and being gentle with yourself when it does. And, looking to create, intentional declarations of allyship with the women in your life. And we'll be guiding people through that process and unwinding envy.
Yeah, it just made me think that you could, when you get that thought, you turn it around to an appreciation. Like maybe what you're criticizing somebody else for is actually their gift, and it might be even your own gift. Even though you have this critical lens about it, it asks, there's gifts there, and to just rephrase things.
Yeah, and we use Dan Siegel, who created interpersonal neurobiology. We use his acronym COAL, which stands for curious, open, accepting, and loving. And it starts with being curious, open, accepting, and loving about your own process, and just be like, oh, I wonder why I am feeling competitive or jealous. I wonder, and just actually giving yourself a little breath and some spaciousness to even be curious and contemplate why. Instead of immediately thinking that it's trying to shove it down, we're just like, oh, wait a minute. I'm going to actually give that some time and notice what is my internal process about that, and be open, accepting, and loving about it, so that you can actually explore it and find out where it comes from and unwind it and resolve it, instead of just perpetuating it because you're scared, so that's what you usually do.
Yes, well, I think this work is so important. That's why we brought you to Women of Wisdom this year, because I think it's one of the real core things for women, for healing, for us to be a collective of empowering women, to be leaders, to know the power of our voices. We have to have that confidence in ourselves and in others, so that we're joining together rather than competing. It's not a competition to change the world and to bring about women's empowerment and women's leadership. Enough of this about tearing women down for being a leader. That just really comes from jealousy too.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we're all leaders. We're a leader in our own seat. Everybody's a leader of their own life. Some people don't think of themselves as leaders. I think especially women. No, I don't. I tried to put on leadership workshops, and it was hard to get people to go to them. And it was kind of like, well, they don't think they're lead. They don't want to be a leader. They don't think of themselves as a leader. But everyone's a leader of their own life.
And there's room for all of us to rise up in our own ways and move forward. There really is.
Right, there is.
Yeah.
So one last question I've asked everybody: how our theme fits into your workshop, celebrating spirit of women, united we are one.
Everything that we're talking about fits into that, right? This is about celebrating each other instead of competing with each other, and moving towards the sense of joy and inspiration it takes when you're authentically admiring each other and declaring your allyship and making room, so that we're one huge collective mandala of magnificence, instead of saying who's at the top. We're all in the center. We're all in the center.
That's right. Well, any last word you want to give our audience today for them to walk away with?
Shelley, you want to say
Join us.
Yeah.
Join us for Unwinding Envy. We can't wait. It's such an important conversation, and we love sharing this, and we learn about ourselves every time we, facilitate this conversation. So
also, just
thank
that
you so much.
It's fun. It's actually fun and pleasurable. It's not like a horrible slog that's full of shame. It's like super actually pleasurable. So know that.
Yeah, I know you're going to
Yeah.
bring fun to it, Teri.
Yeah.
And something you said, oh no, I forget. I'm going to leave it at that.
Fine. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Chris.
Yes, well, we look
Yeah,
forward to seeing you in
Chris,
March.
pleasure.
And please give your website so people can find out more about you.
Oh, yes, it's livingloverevolution.org and aphroditetemple.com. Those are our websites. Yeah.
Okay, great. livingloverevolution.org. And also check out womanofwisdom.org for what all the events are. You can find Teri and Shelley there on Saturday. And you can also register for even just one of the days. You can go Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, or go the whole weekend and really immerse yourself in the divine feminine and being with women and supporting each other. And yeah, it's always a fabulous time. So thank you for listening to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.